Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Men and Sex. I'm your host, Mr. Wood. This is a podcast all about normalizing these conversations that so few of us get to have in open, mature spaces. In my experience in the men's communities and men's personal development, this is the subject that needs so much of our attention, yet hardly gets talked about. Today's episode, I'm really excited about. It's all about the power of activating your voice. And of course, for our subject matter, this is going to be both inside the bedroom and outside of the bedroom. My guest today, I met in Peru maybe 7 years ago on an ayahuasca dieta with my father. I'm going to share a little bit of that story. But for now, I'm going to welcome Jessica to the show. Jessica, please share your last name with us as well because it's so beautiful and I want everyone to hear it and I don't want to mess up the pronunciation.
So my full name is Jessica Bégin. It's a French Canadian last name.
Beautiful. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here and let every let everybody know where you are right now because I think it plays a part in our discussion today.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very curious to see what will emerge. So I'm at home. I live in the Sacred Valley of Peru, about an hour and a half from Cusco. Yeah. So I
Beautiful.
have the my office window looks out to the apus, the mountain spirits all around.
Beautiful. So, as I briefly mentioned earlier, I met Jessica when my dad actually called me into this adventure. He said, Ian, I think I want to sit with ayahuasca, and I would love for you to accompany me on this adventure. And I was just sharing with Jessica before the episode started that this hilarious part was part of the dieta that was being shared with us was that it was about voice activation. And my dad and I both thought, oh, great. We want to be public speakers. We want to learn how to present and talk. And we just assumed that this is what we were going to be doing. But ultimately, at this 2 week dieta in Peru, there was a lot that Jessica led us through in really getting in touch with the power of our voice all the way to a vibrational level, which was so powerful for me to experience was don't pay attention to the sound. What am I feeling in these different ah, e, o, ooh, subtle sounds and practices? And I've shared with you listeners before that I found in my own journey the potency of speaking about these subjects, of talking about sexuality, of talking about the things that we're not allowed to talk about, and cultivating this, making sounds, working with sounds. So that's the hope that we're going to dive into in this episode. Jessica, I'd love if you just shared a little bit with the listeners about your background in working with the voice and what's led you to doing the work that I got to so beautifully experience with you.
Hmm. Um, yeah. Well, it's one of those lifelong themes for me of, first of all, as a child, as a young person, feeling very shut down, very limited, um, very timid with my own vocal expression, and growing up with this tension, with this discomfort of like feeling all inside of me that wanted to be expressed and shared, and this tension or this feeling of inhibition or fear of not being received or fear of rejection, um, and a longing, just simply a longing to what we talk about as being fully expressed. And at the same time, for me, I was always very musical, and singing or um, creating melodies was a way that I found a way to soothe myself or to center myself. And as I grew older, that took me on a lot of paths of inquiry. Um, and when we met, as I mentioned earlier, I, it was 7 years ago. So when I think about it now, at that moment in time, I was at a much different place of embodiment of what I was seeking to embody, you know?
Mm.
And one of the ways that I dare to learn to embody something that I'm studying is like, well, I'm not a master, but I'm going to try to teach this. And in that way, I internalize something. So, um, since we met, I've gone very deeply in a particular kind of method with a particular teacher, which has helped me immensely and informed me immensely. So what I can say in this moment is I'm really not what I would consider a teacher or a master. I am an investigative um, student.
Yeah.
Yeah. And anything that I have learned to embody has largely come from the method of my teacher. Her name is Almunis, and she developed a method called the authentic voice or the embodied voice. So a lot of what I can talk about comes through that path of study with her. Yeah.
Well, I think something so potent that you shared was your own journey and the fear of rejection and the longing to fully express. And I think that this is a huge reason why I'm so passionate about the voice activation is it is the path of facing the fear of rejection and the path to continually living more and more fully expressed. And I think that it ties so well to this subject matter of why so many men in particular aren't speaking, aren't sharing, aren't expressing is that fear of rejection or lack of acceptance or fear of someone thinking they're a weirdo or something they desire or want is weird. So I think that that's a potent thread from your own experience. And I'm excited to dance with the methodologies as well. And I want to just share some of the things you taught me at the Dieta that were extremely powerful for me and so simple. Which one was just going through the vowels of ah, e, o, oo, and how you led us to just going through. I still do it to this day where it's I go through them, moving through each of them and feeling the resonance in my chest, feeling the vibrations, letting the mind do whatever it's going to do with the sounds. But something as simple as that, and I'm telling the listeners right now, a practice as simple as this and activating your voice is extremely powerful. It doesn't take a lot to actually start to liberate our voices more because so many of us are so repressed in our expression, especially when it comes to singing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, from the time we're born, we receive feedback from our environment, from our caregivers, when certain ways of expressing receive acceptance and love, and other ways of expressing don't, you know? So naturally, our inbuilt survival mechanism um, starts, you know, having us basically shut down parts of our natural authentic expression in favor of those ways of expressing that ensure our survival, our acceptance, our approval. And of course, that's different for every human depending on the environment that you grew up in. And often it has particular ways of showing up between how men are socialized to be and how women are socialized to be. Yeah, what kinds of expression are approved of for a little boy or for a little girl? What kinds of expression um, provide safety? So often, not always, for a female child, for a little girl, they get approved of for being nice, for being sweet, for being for behaving. And for little boys, they might get approval for being assertive, or it's really depends. But over time, what we develop, and this affects everything. It affects the subtle tensions in the way that our vocal cords conform to express, in the tension in our bodies, in our posture. Um, and some of those expressions are kind of like a pulling back and pulling in, and some of those expressions are like an over and a compensation of forcing, a pushing, of like, this is who I am. So the way that I've learned, especially through the method that I've been studying with my teacher, is a lot about just dismantling the tension. Yeah.
Mm,
And
mm,
kind of in the beginning, um, as you mentioned, it's a lot about just learning to receive my own sound.
yeah.
Because our expression, especially in our culture, is very much oriented towards how am I being received? How am I being
Mm,
responded to? And there's this innate tension in like, and then there's not as much attention, or maybe no attention put into what does that vibration feel like in my body. And if you just, even if you're speaking, I can start in this moment, start tuning into the vibration of the sound in my body. And then there's this subtle relaxation of like, oh, I'm getting an internal massage as I'm talking. It doesn't even matter what I'm talking about. And as I connect to that sense of pleasure, my
mm.
own sound, of receiving my own vibrational signature as medicine in my body and in my field, what starts to emerge is naturally more authentic, and where it vibrates from me and where it vibrates for you or for whoever's listening to me begins to alter. And there's an entrainment which happens. Um, a coherent vibration will naturally entrain incoherent vibrations into synchronicity
Ooh.
with it. So if I access my own sound from a place of pleasure, relaxation, that's a coherent, regenerative experience of the vibration. The person that's listening is going to start to naturally just begin to synchronize with the word which is being shared, or with the sound, or the frequency.
Wow. That's so rich. And I really lit up when you talked about how we can start to tune, like I'm doing it now, as you just instructed, to pay
Yeah.
attention to the vibration
Mhm.
inside as I'm saying these words. And this is something I've been obsessed with lately is can I amplify the attention to the pleasure that I'm feeling from that
Mhm.
vibration? Like, oh wow, I'm having this internal massage that is the vibration of the air and the vocal cords, and it's a completely different experience when I'm paying attention to that vibration and another attuning the mind to some pleasure that I'm missing out on every time I speak.
Mhm. Yeah, well, the whole body is full of resonant spaces that are being vibrated. Well, essentially everything is vibration, as we know, but the voice, my bones resonate, um, the vocal cords, the chest cavity, the nasal cavity, and the vibratory field around the body is being resonated. And so one of the things I learned from my teacher is when babies are in this developmental stage and they start making sounds, and their parents and caregivers um, mimic those sounds, they're literally giving feedback. You exist, you know?
Whoa.
And so when we didn't receive adequate feedback from our environments in that early developmental stage, we can grow up to have this sense of like, do I exist? Am I here? Where am I? So, in this process of reparenting ourselves as we come to adulthood and we start to realize, oh, wow, I'm really messed up. And one of the very simple ways that we can do that is simply giving ourselves that biofeedback, feeding back my own sound, receiving, learning to receive my own sound and imprint myself with the vibratory signature, which is my soul. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things, people talk about it all of the time, whether they're talking about singing or just that common sentiment of like, I want to be fully expressed. I want to be uninhibited. Um, or this they start, touching the chest of like, what does it feel like to have no limitation or no self-policing or questioning, but just like this is this is me. This is all that I am, and I give of my gift, and I bless myself, and I bless my environment, and I receive through that exchange.
It's interesting because my mind has played with this recently, this idea of it and growing and so beautiful. I enjoy it, which is, oh, I go to a sound bath. And and what you're sharing with me is tapping into the sound bath that my voice is. That coming from the inside out, this is the constant sound bath of what am I speaking? What am I saying? Am I vibrating? Am I paying attention to the feeling and the tones?
Exactly. I mean, to me, the more that I go into this, the more it just seems like a travesty. Like the most powerful self-healing, regenerative, restorative tool that we are all born with is like we're not taught to use it. And there's been studies, scientific studies that have been made about sound healing to measure like the measurable effects of any given sound in a sound healing context. And the sound of one's own voice has the most measurable healing effects on one's own body. Yeah. And
Whoa.
so, and it's always to me like remarkable, like just astounding when I work with myself and when I work with others, and I might be feeling kind of like distorted or like not, something's off, and just within 3 minutes of toning or humming, completely change my frequency. And that's something that we can do anywhere, at home, before bed, when you wake up, taking a moment, and these kind of long steady tones have this very relaxing effect on the nervous system. And I just, sometimes I imagine what would happen if like all of those little kids at school were taught this from a young age, what kind of society would we have? And not only does that happen individually, but when we're sounding and toning or singing in a group context, we attune to the environment and to each other, and we come into this lived embodied experience of unity, of harmony, of all of the harmonics and the differences and the individual qualities of each of our energy harmonizing and weaving together and becoming one. So when you look at traditional societies, indigenous societies, societies which are connected to a living millennial tradition, singing and dancing, for that matter, are always a part of that and seem to hold this function of like tuning the society, like a healthy society
Ooh.
is like you don't need to think about it. It's not of like an idea. It's like, oh, I'm living this, living attunement, living harmonization, living synchronicity with the people around me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up because we had to touch on that point. And that's something that I see has a huge impact on me. I see a lot. I know this is much grander than America, but I see a lot of it in America. It has its uniqueness that creates this, that there's a lot of us that have been orphaned from cultures. We've
Mhm.
lost through one, two, three generations to our languages. We've become, a lot of mixes. And so, I don't have a connection to a lineage of song and dance that is from quote unquote my people. And that's something that's caught my attention so much is everyone comes from a background that has singing and dancing.
Mhm.
And I love the way that you just said that about the songs that they're singing is them tuning through generations and generations. It's like this way of tuning in a specific way through the receiving of, if not their own, but the people around them's vibration and the tone of the music and sound that they're bathing themselves in.
Mhm. Yeah, and if when you look at there's languages like Sanskrit, like Hebrew, and many indigenous languages that the words of certain chants, they're not necessarily everyday words that are used in everyday spoken language. They're spirit words. They're words that are somehow channeled or gifted from um, unseen forces. And they're codes, basically. They're like activating codes. And so when you work with a mantra or a chant with a specific intent together, there's an even greater potentialization. But even for those of us which don't come from an unbroken lineage, although we, in this day and age, we have a lot of accessibility, to learn from many traditions. The building blocks of language of all sound are the vowels, like you spoke about. And the vibratory signature or the code contained within in the vowels is something universal. So that's an entry point. And if we talk about the vowels as, if the sound of the voice is a river, the vowels are like the water, and the consonants are like the riverbanks. They're giving form and they're directing and they're propelling that current in a certain direction.
Mm.
Mhm.
I've
And
never
so
heard it say
this,
that. I've never heard that about vowels. That's beautiful.
well, it's not mine. I got this from my teacher Almunis.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it gives us uh, if you go into certain like mystical traditions of sound, you can find this knowledge that's been kept and reflected. But one of the things that I really appreciate about working with the vowels is that their vibratory signature, their effect is immediately sensed and felt. Just so if we talk about ah, ah,
Ah.
ah, it has this quality of expanding and opening infinitely, right? And when we hear the sound, it's tangibly felt that that ah is like expanding and opening from the heart, that the seat, the home of that sound is from the heart. And if you have an O, like the letter O is literally a closed circle, right? So O is it has a different quality of expansion. It's not expanding and opening infinitely. It's expanding in a contained, like a
Mm.
concentric circle that just opens outward. And so when we work with those tones, I can talk about the I can talk about the qualities, but they are immediately recognized by the person that's making the tones because they can feel that in their body. It's not something abstract.
This is something that I'm really grateful to talk about on this episode because I think it's the perfect bridge for especially men because there are all these programmings in society of what's acceptable, what's cool, what's not masculine, or whatever the story is. And for me, my path has been Okay, I'm terrified to sing. Okay, I'm gonna go towards that. That's just the type of person I am. I want to go towards the things that I'm afraid of. But I've found that that experience with you and the toning was the best bridge possible because I'm not in a performance of singing a song that's been scripted to hit notes in a certain way and be like this. It's a discovery process of liberation. It's discovering my authentic expression, my full expression within an ah or an oh, something so simple and yet so much depth of the different ways that vibration feels in my body, how it sounds, how I'm receiving it or not receiving it. And for me, that simple practice has been so, you could say, healing as it has propelled me as a speaker. I've gone and karaoke twice now in public, which has been liberating, and it just is this continual discovery of what is my full expression as I allow myself to make sounds and allow myself to receive them, whether it's the vibration or actually hearing it.
Hmm. Yeah, I love how simple it can be as an entry point, and a lot of people are really afraid, or when I offer a class in the context of a retreat or something, they're like, this is not my comfort zone. I don't know if I want to be here. But the simplicity of the method and beginning where one is um, brings a lot of comfort, in that beginning. And so it is possible, for me, for example, when I started learning with my teacher, there was so much, because I had had so much repression, there was kind of like an overcompensation that I had learned to make as an adult year, where I sort of forcibly lowered my voice or pushed it out in terms of like wanting to present as someone more confident or more powerful. And in general, in our society, what is valued is this front and forward expression. Yeah. Um, and the expression, the backspace of like relaxing into softness, relaxing into a feeling of being held, of letting go into a certain kind of flow, isn't something that we are taught to value or to access. And in general, when we talk about masculine and feminine, no matter what kind of body you were born into, all of us have masculine and feminine, or we might call it yin or yang to avoid this like over identification with gender.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, being in a male body, a masculine body, there is a certain amount of the biological makeup of your body which informs the expression. For example, like a male penis, it's directional, erect, point and shoot, like the male, that's like built into the male body, where a woman's body, a female body, has a womb, and its job in the context of the reproductive, biological agenda of being a life form on Earth is to receive that information and in this round contain. So of course we are influenced by the physical structure of our bodies. And at the same time, as a woman, I can still access um, that male part of my energy. And as a man, I can access the female part of my energy. I can access my energetic womb space. And I can learn to embody what we might talk about as this like flow and receptivity and um, maleness and femaleness, they contain so many different qualities across the spectrum. There's a perhaps a male quality of receptivity and flow, and there's a female quality of directionality and structure and integrity and alignment. And ultimately, those qualities all support one another. So the science of sound and
Hmm.
sound is really supportive to learn about those primordial energies within us and how to work with them and how to cultivate them and how to bring balance and order to my relationships and my life. Um, yeah, it's a big subject and a big study.
Something you said that I think is really important to talk about and tease apart a little bit is this aspect of repression leading to overcompensation. And I judge that the vast majority of all people, but in this show I talk to men mostly, is the vast majority of men have been repressed in their expression, especially when it comes to the bedroom, intimacy, sexuality, speaking for what they want, making sound, something we were talking about earlier that is so fascinating to me is what's portrayed is that a woman is going to make all this sound in the bedroom, but the man is like stoically just there, hardly making any sound. And from my own embodiment of like the pleasure you talked about, that is feeling the vibration of my own voice, something is closed off, something is repressed when I am making no noise in such a sensational experience. There's so much sensation in intimacy to allow this channel of expression so that that energy is not just stuck in there building, particularly in one area of our body, but to actually start to open that channel up. It then there's vibration from that, and then there's energy flowing through instead of, I think, like a jar with a lid on it and just filling it with something that's going to lead to an issue of that jar being too full. And I see that so much, this dance of being taught to repress, whether it's just in communicating or in actually making sound. I mean, that's what led me on this journey is realizing even in the men's work world, even in worldwide organizations of men, there was hardly any space for us to have open conversations that speaking to our experiences with sexuality, our pains, our traumas, our curiosities, our confusion, just this, once again, that jar that's closed off and has no expression. So I think this repression, and there's almost like, for me, taking the lid off the jar and letting there be overexpression, overcompensation because it's been closed for so long.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because as you're describing, the experience of men's repression, especially in the realm of sexuality, I was reflecting that for women, I think, and probably we're all receiving education about sex from porn. You know what I mean? It's like, and for women, there's this sort of expectation of like, oh, she's supposed to be screaming and flailing, and um, a lot of the time, a woman might not even feel the pleasure, but she's making exaggerated sounds so that the man will feel like he's doing his job. And so that inauthentic sound of overexpression or expressing for, so that the other person will feel good about themselves is another way that the authentic sound is being um,
Wow.
yeah, controlled. And so, it can be, I think, a super interesting area to study. You spoke about kind of over exaggerating the sound just to like blow the lid off, right? And in the context of what I've been studying, I mean, I think there's a lot of different healing modalities or which talk about like cathartic release or just like, but in my experience, um, okay, there's a charge, right? And there's some kind of relief in a release of the charge.
Yeah.
And yet, if that release is not an authentic sound,
Mm,
if that release is about an expression of frustration or pain,
mm,
it's not going to leave the body with a healing imprint, you know?
mm.
So in this method that I've been working with, it's not
Oh,
about catharsis.
wow. That just landed in a really deep way.
It's not about just like, just let it all go. What? It's about what is the sound which feels restorative, which feels pleasurable, which feels regenerative. And through making sound, you might arrive to a pocket of pain or tension or an expression of an ancestral voice that hadn't been given space to, because we talk about the history of our own bodies of this lifetime, but we're also carrying the history of all of our ancestors and all of the ways in which they were shut down and repressed, and all of the voices which never got to be shared. Um,
Wow.
so when we give voice to the unvoiced, I believe and I have been taught that it needs to be with this quality of like soothing and restoring. And when something gets too intense, because if you're in a primal scream
Yeah.
workshop
Yeah.
and then, and I've done them, and I didn't feel good afterwards. I felt like I re traumatized myself, So if that exists, there needs to be like a collecting and a transforming of that energy into something that's restorative and life affirming, life giving. So I don't have a lot of experience with exploring through sound in the context of sexuality. Maybe one day I'll get a chance to do that, but I would think it would be important to approach it very cautiously in a sense, in a sense of like because you in that meeting you're not only affecting yourself but you're affecting your partner,
Mm.
so you and ultimately the power of making sound together could be to harmonize and unify and entrain and find unity order and through this sounding which my idea of it without having actually
Yeah.
explored it in practice is that it could be that's how we could see it could be really healing. um
I like the, my mind is going straight to toning, that we're
yeah
toning together and we're finding a resonance in our sound. And I'm like, wow, that's even adding more depth to the intimacy of the experience.
yeah yeah, and I imagine it's not something it's a because we're entering into a space which is very vulnerable, working with our own voice sounding. I think it would be something that a certain container of safety would need to be built.
Yeah.
Maybe we experience and we practice toning together outside of the sexual act for a while,
Yeah.
just to build that container and feel it. And then we add a little bit of touch and we add a little bit of care and giving a lot of feedback, because the voice can also open us into portals of memory. And we want to be careful not to be like new age shamans that are like, oh, everything that the voice can do is just good. And like, there's a certain amount of study. and care and investigation and um, yeah, taking the time to move slowly that I think is important.
Yeah, and I think what you shared, it really resonates for me is that I get into practicing some toning or some liberation of my voice, discovering where I'm closing off, whether it's toning, making sound, or maybe it's just communication. Maybe it's just talking about something. I think that's a huge one that I, obviously experience in men is when we've spent our whole life repressing communicating something, that just even that is something we step into, is finding a group of men where I can do that, finding communities where I can have that open conversation. And for me, it's been okay, I'm practicing toning on my own outside of intimacy, outside of sexuality. But then what I'm starting to do is bring that into, okay, how do I practice that with myself and activating that kind of energy? And like you're saying, taking those steps and not just jumping all the way in. And I think just plant, what I want to do in this episode is just plant the seed of people to reflect on where have I turned off or repressed my voice or the
Yeah.
sounds that I make? Where am I repressing? Where do I have fear of someone leaving or not approving of me by the sounds that I make or by the things that I say?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, we hear a lot of people are like, oh, my throat chakra is blocked. Yeah. But usually the whole energetic anatomy system is blocked, like the root is blocked, or the sacral chakra is blocked, or the solar plexus. And so when I started studying with my teacher, the first thing that she had us do was what she calls open the portals of the body. As the voice is not an isolated phenomena that lives here. It's this whole physical body, multidimensional body. And so establishing a solid base, a solid connection with the root, especially a solid connection with the pelvic floor, the perineum, and the sense of being anchored and fluid and connected in pleasure as I sound. You know,
Hmm.
I think a lot of the way that we sound in our society or the way that we sing is like it's just here. And the sound, if I'm really rigid and I just come from here, it's gonna be a really different experience. If I'm like, oh yeah, there's my pelvis, and I'm connected to the earth, and I'm aware of all of this, you know, energetic space that I'm unfolding into.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think might be more prevalent for men is the way that men are socialized to, as I mentioned before, to be in this very like linear, direction oriented, like the I don't move my hips, I don't sway my body. That's that would be feminine. Maybe for some male bodies that's fine, but how do how can I move into that dance of flow, of pleasure, of sensuality, and connect the way that I'm accessing my voice within that container. Um, and in this method, we work with all of the different energies. And one of the things that one of the exercises that my teacher offers is called the father consonants. So if you think about in a lot of the languages, especially you know Western languages, but you have the word for father, papa, dada, abba, baba. It's these consonants or
Wow.
tata, taita, ta, da, ba, pa, and that the quality of that consonant projects the sound. Yeah.
Oh,
Which which is essentially, the father, he projected his seed in order to create the life of the child, right? And so that we do this exercise with the father condoms where it's like choose a point and send the dart. And
wow.
for sometimes for people or for women, that directionality of like, oh, I need to track where I am and I need to follow through is very challenging. And they're very good at the flowing and they're just like closing the eyes. And then my teacher would be like, no, open your eyes, look where you're going, know where you're aiming, follow that thread. And so that was something an exercise that I worked with in a moment when I needed to develop my own masculine qualities, which had a lot to do with my work and my service in the world. I had to develop this very kind of like directional um, and follow through, like I see what I want and I'm going for it and I get there. And then I know in decision making and fast, and then to be able to combine that also with this organic of like, oh, I'm just in this intuitive, pleasurable, like, it's taking me where I want to go. And then when you combine those two energies, music, that's what you get, music.
Mm. I could listen to you talk like that for a long time. I mean, the simplicity of what I felt when you talked about Papa, Dada, Baba, and the projection. And then when you were talking about the flow, I felt the vowels. I felt the vowel space in what you were sharing between the projected sounds. I mean, I think this is the richness of life that has been passed down through the cultures that have a lineage that is connected, that so I myself I feel and believe so many of us are starving for that simplicity of language and the words that I'm saying and all the wisdom that's wrapped up in it to say something like dada papa and to be curious. Once again, like I want to inspire curiosity for the listeners and particularly for men to take that step, whether it's to go to something that is an activation of the voice or to look up a YouTube video that is about toning or that is to find a men's group where I talk about the things that I haven't been talking about my whole life. This, and like you said, this whole system, this whole channel starts to receive a different vibration, different information that's being shared and reverberated back through our body, our bones, our muscles.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I one other thing I could mention is that the Western idea of therapy and talk therapy and processing and going, unearthing that which hasn't been exposed and talking about it. And that certainly serves a purpose and it has a place. But one of the dangers is that when I invoke that story, I entrap myself in the story. I entrap myself in the beliefs or the feeling of being victimized or the pain. I kind of reaffirm it, and I think that's where Western psychology sometimes it takes a long time. You have to tell the story for 10 years over and over again before it loses its charge. And then when you work with other forms of healing, for example, in the context that we met, the maestros, the Shipibo maestros, they're singing to reweave the story. They're vibrationally reweaving something else. And so the power of the voice is that it's not really necessary to go into the story because the vibration um, weaves it into a new vibration.
Mhm.
So I think they can be complementary in terms of like, okay, yeah, we talk about it, we expose, that power and the vulnerability of exposing something which I never felt safe enough, or which,
Yeah.
so much fear of being rejected if I expose this part of myself. And then, but we don't just leave it there. We invite that into the experience of sounding, of harmonizing, of creating a new frequency that is felt in the body. And, recently I just came out of a month-long dieta that I did for my own personal healing. And one of the things that the plant that I was working with guided me to do is because I was feeling a lot of tension in my heart space, which I've been carrying for a long time. And sometimes there's this frustration of like, well, I've spent so many years, dedicating myself to healing, studying, and this is still there, when is it? And then, so I was guided to like go back to every situation throughout my life where I had been harmed, or there was a memory of some kind of abuse, or a memory of some kind of um, rejection, whatever it might be, and to look at that memory and be like, well, in that relationship there was also love. I felt love. I received love. I gave love. In that situation, there was something that I learned. I was initiated into something. There was some way that I was shaped, and to collect really examine all of the positive, all of the beauty, all of the goodness, everything, and some of these situations were hard. There was situations of being sexually violated. There were situations of being abused, of being rejected, of, I'm a human being, and as all human beings, I've lived quite a number of intense situations. But within every one of those, collect all of the goodness. Like I take that and I receive that, and thank you. And thank you to that person. I forgive you, and I'm ready. I don't need to let go of the victimization. I
Mm.
don't need to let go of the pain. I don't need to hold that anymore. I don't need to hold the pain. And I open up to something new. I'm opening up to a whole new story, which is something that I haven't ever experienced. A way of loving, a way of being, a way of living, which is unknown to me, And I don't even know what that could be like, but I imagine what it could be.
Mm.
And then with that kind of intention, bringing the voice of what kind of voice
Ooh,
harmonizes with my intention and expresses and fill my field with that, and imprint my cells with that, vibrate my bones with that.
I love that. And this conversation is really sticking with me because I do a lot of work with men that is leads to cathartic releases. And as you said, that's not a coherent tone that's left in the body. And I'm just like, okay, how could I invite in that toning? If that's something that comes up for a man, how can I invite him into a tone that is what his body is looking for in integrating that or leaving a resonance that it can really work in a good way. I love this idea of them being together. And I'm I'm curious if you have a particular favorite or something that you think would work really good for men that are listening right now, like a simple practice, whether it's just awe or where's like the beginner's spot to start with opening up to sound and vibration a little bit more in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that the most simple and most accessible is humming. And and
Mm,
and
yeah.
humming by its nature is a contained quality. The mouth is closed. So the vibration is very much being directed like back into the body. It's not projected out, right? So with humming, the the idea is like that the face, that the mouth, that the jaw be as soft as possible. And you can use the hands like and explore like, oh, where do I feel this resonance in my body, in my throat, in my chest, with these deep breaths and these long, soft tones. Hmm. And then another another exercise from the method that I study and that I work with um, is called the authentic vowels. So,
Whoa.
for example, if you go into any culture all around the world and you were to say, ah, the person would get you. Or oh,
Oh.
oh, oh, ooh,
Oh.
ooh, yeah. So that when we say the vowels like that, there's no artifice. It's such an immediate reaction that it kind of bypasses like our control mechanisms, like ah, and then from there I can take that and the idea is that you want to really notice like where you're holding your jaw and your neck. And like you need to be okay with looking a bit weird, like uh, and just hanging the head to one side. So when you access the sound from that it's like the normal speaking voice. It's not a singing voice. It's not like ah,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
ah. And then also, and this is something that singers do, as a practice. In Spanish, they call it sirenas or sirens.
I love that one.
So these gestures that I'm doing, they are supporting the sound because the tendency is when I make sound is I kind of like shut down my body, and that shutting down or compressing the body, it's
Yeah.
going to compress and shut down the vocal cords. So I use the gestures as this way of like, oh, I'm painting the sound throughout my field, what my teacher calls the vibratory membrane. So the vibratory membrane is like this, you know, soft, spongy, energetic membrane that surrounds the body. And just how the body collects tension and gets compressed and rigid, the vibratory membrane also gets tense and rigid. And so when I make sound from this quality of like opening up space, opening up the back space, the lateral space, and using this gesture to extend and nourish and moisten, kind of bring the elasticity, the natural elasticity to restore it
Mm.
in the field. And so then I'm literally filling my field with my own sound. And I'm creating this tangible sense of like I'm contained and protected by the coherent energy of my own frequency. And so when you go out into the world or before you are going to be public speaking or before you're going to be sharing, it's also a way of like, I'm really like
Mm.
contained, not in a sense of like I'm locked in, but I'm like held by this very rich, full vibrational frequency of my own self,
Mm.
and
Mm.
that I can access the authority of what I know from within in a place that feels really secure, in a place that feels really, it's imprinted in the space around me. And it's not about trying to convince anybody. I'm just living in that,
Mm.
richness, and I'm sharing from there.
Mm. I love that. I love that. And I also feel what I enjoy so much of these practices is bringing intentionality, which brings me into the present moment, which brings me into actually experiencing the thing that I am doing in that moment. Um, Thank you so much for all that you've brought on this episode, your wisdom. There's so much gold. Is there any last tidbit that you want to leave for anyone that is feeling that fear, that resistance of expression, whether it's speaking, whether it's singing, any last things that come to mind for you to share to the listeners?
Mm. Well, I think it can be really helpful to have a guide.
Mm.
And so for me, it was also essential to have someone that could mirror back to me because I had my blind spots. And I had, we are so conditioned that I didn't even know how to recognize when I was expressing it inauthentically. So I would really highly recommend, if people want to look up my teacher, she has a website called sonidosana.com.
I'll put
And
it in the description too.
she does intensives several times a year in different parts of the world. And of course, like in a lot of spheres of alternative or new age inquiry, usually it's all women and like one man, one man. And especially in this realm, I think with the
Yeah.
voice. And we've been talking about it for years of like how much we would just love the brothers, the men to come and join us and those rich, deeper tones, and how important that inquiry is. Um, so that's perhaps what I could suggest. I
So
also
what?
sometimes do one-on-ones for people that are looking to kind of
Ooh.
initiate a discovery, of getting some principles and getting some grounding in the fundamentals of the practice.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'll put that information in the description as well. And highly recommend that. I know that having a session with you like that would be profound because it was profound. Obviously, I got to spend quite a bit more time with you, but it has been a lasting impression in me. And so much of why I personally focus on men's relationship with sexuality is I know that it ripples into so many areas of their life in the same way that if you work with your voice, if you work with sound, it's going to have, speaking to the listeners, going to have impact in so many different areas of your life. So highly recommend working with Jessica and that will be in the description.
Yeah, the voice is the expression of vital energy. It is absolutely essential, I think, to connect with, you know, vital energy, sexual energy, pleasure, life force. And so any expression of the voice is going to be fed from a healthy relationship and a healthy connection to the ground of our being.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you for the medicine that you bring in the world and know that it's rippling out continuously in my own life. And I'm sure so many people's lives that you work with. And I hope that some men join you from this podcast and continue that journey. And I'm planting the seed to come revisit what you're doing in the future.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for the conversation. Really enjoyed the interchange and exploration.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. More episodes to come. And please take this information and integrate it into your life. Don't just have it be more information that bounces off of your brain. Go do one practice or try one thing or explore in some way to integrate and embody it. And I look forward to sharing more in future episodes.